Adam Pritzker is the co-founder of Assembled Brands, a modern holding company that offers a new way to finance consumer brands. Adam previously co-founded General Assembly, which raised $100 million from top-tier investors and was acquired by a Deco Group for more than $400 million. Adam has been featured in Forbes 30 Under 30 and Vanity Fair and Inc. and the list goes on, all for his entrepreneurial endeavors and your hand modeling days, I believe. I'm kidding. No. Have you done hand modeling? I don't know.
No.
Maybe that wasn't on your wiki page,
not.
but okay. You never know. Okay, Adam graduated from Columbia University with a BA in anthropology and economics. Really cool. Thank you very much, Adam, again for the time. And there's a lot to unpack, and so we'll jump right into it. But welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Alejandro. I really appreciate it, and I think what you're doing with the Techstars alumni community is very cool and interesting. So let's go. Let's do it.
I love it. I love it. Really appreciate the time. Okay, so with my extensive wiki research, I saw that it's clear you grew up in an entrepreneurial family. You have uncles and aunts and incredibly successful businesses. Hyatt, right? Was Hyatt one of them?
Yeah.
Like Hyatt Hotels? Okay,
Yes.
It's wiki, so I have no clue if it's who put stuff
Yeah,
in
my
there,
grandfather actually didn't start Hyatt Hotels. It was a motel by LAX called Hyatt House, founded by a guy named Hyatt Von Den. He bought the hotel and then scaled it, among other companies that he and his brother and his dad started. So you're right. I definitely stand on the shoulders of giants and feel incredibly lucky. It's funny when people are like, how did you decide to be an entrepreneur? It's like, well, it was just kind of who I was surrounded with. I'm like, at a family dinner or a party or whatever, or a gathering, it's like, well, what does he do? And it's like, oh, he's got this kind of company. Oh, what does she do? Well, she's got this kind of family business. And so it just seemed like obvious, like that's what you would go do. Of course, I suppose it's not that obvious, but to a kid surrounded
well,
by...
if that's your world, of course. Like
Exactly.
if you're surrounded by entrepreneurs, that's what you believe everyone else does.
That's right. And, that's why I really wanted to start businesses that empowered entrepreneurs. That's what, was so exciting to me about building kind of platforms for people building businesses. And that's really what, General Assembly is, and what Assembled Brands is, really helping kind of others build their companies and their businesses, always was interesting to me. It's kind of like a meta approach to entrepreneurship, I suppose.
I love that, and the creativity between the names.
Thank you.
Assembly,
Yes.
it's just. I'll ask you a lot of questions on not just the creativity between the names, but more
building.
things.
Love to build. What can I
say? Well, reflecting back, are there habits or a certain mindset? And you covered a little bit. This is regarding just your entrepreneurial background, right? And that of your family, and those that were around you in your world. Are there habits or certain mindset that came in handy reflecting back during your entrepreneurial journey? Are there things that you're like, wow, I guess that was just nature, or second nature to me, or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm completely aware of how lucky I am in kind of having the access to capital to not only go build things, but to fund them as well. So I think that's, obviously a huge advantage. I think in terms of figuring out what to build, really the question is, what problem are you solving in the world, and kind of viewing that as a puzzle, and that being really exciting. So, in the case of Assembled Brands, really Assembled Brands Capital specifically, it's really filling the gap left by venture capitalists and regional banks and funding the e-commerce ecosystem. And, that seemed like a large gap that is now obviously turned into just a huge void as, regional banks and venture capitalists and
And
growth investors just stopped funding e-commerce businesses.
and I wanna we'll definitely cover that. Just to go back to what you said about like the access, I also have to say access to capital is great. That is nice to have, but my experience has been you can access things once you know what you have and what you're going after. And obviously, if you have certain guidelines, right? Someone mentors that say like this is how things are done. That's all wonderful. But my point is, I don't want to take it what you're being very honest as well as like, well, access to capital from what I had is what was a big part of my success. But I disagree. I think you gotta put in also the hard work that you have, and you gotta understand it. You got to go through the journey as most people do, right? When you're selling something, The customer on the other end doesn't give a crap, who you are, where you are, whatever. It's just like, are you fulfilling my needs? Yes or no? And you just have to figure that journey out for yourself. So, anyways, I just wanted to say that
Well,
because you're
I
being very
appreciate
modest. You're
that.
being very modest.
Uh,
Um,
I do think it gets you, a part of the way there. Of course, the other part is hard, and
yeah,
it's, the willingness to just grind and work hard and get up earlier and work later and attract the right people and roll up your
right.
sleeves and build together. And that, that's obviously not a given. And
Mhm.
I also feel lucky that, like, I'm a competitive person. I enjoy working with people and competing out in the market. I enjoy solving problems. I enjoy entrepreneurship. So I think if those things like weren't fun to me or interesting to me, I'm not, it would be a lot harder to do.
Yep. And that's what I want to get into, that journey. And before jumping into Assemble Brands, I want to talk a bit about that journey with General Assembly. So can you share me why and how General Assembly was created?
Sure.
Yeah, let's just start there.
So I had graduated from college. I was thinking about, I was really interested in design, honestly, and in human-centered design and service design in particular. And I applied to a job at a design firm called IDEO, who I've worked with many times since then. And
Super
I also
recognized. Hmm.
yeah, I also applied to business school, and I started to think, well, what if you kind of combined these ideas, and provided a space at a lower cost than business school, filled it with entrepreneurs who were building things and learning by doing, kind of like a Montessori method, if you will.
Right, right,
Uh,
right.
and it got those folks together. And I specifically remember kind of a round table early on thinking, at my apartment, thinking about whether an idea like this would be interesting, and having people there from the food and beverage industry and from the fashion industry and from the technology industry. And, everybody really seemed interested. This was, by the way, around 2010. So
Hmm.
you got to put yourself back in the mindset of New York in 2010. The financial crisis happened in 2008, 2009. New York was a pretty desolate place at the time, particularly where the kind of center of building was happening, which was in Flatiron. So just to give you,
Mm.
some data, I mean, the rents there at the time were $30 a foot. Last time I checked, and who knows now,
$30 a
actually
foot. Oh my
post
God, I
COVID.
can't.
Yeah, I mean they're $90 to $100 now. So it was a lot easier to start things in that kind of environment. Again,
Right.
better lucky than smart. And we just started getting these groups of people together in a physical space at 902 Broadway. And that community really your customers tell you what business you're in. So we thought we were in co-working, and we were actually in education. And people started requesting classes in user experience design and in software development and in just like practical skills that would frankly either help them build their business or just get paid more at their current job. If you're doing kind of layouts for Vogue magazine, right, it would probably be helpful to understand web design and user experience because that's where the world was and is going. And so you would probably get paid more for that job too. And so, classes turned into workshops and workshops turned into courses. And before we knew it, it was really like a fully fledged education business.
How long was that process from understanding what your customers wanted to what you believe the business was originally, which you mentioned that, co-working space?
It happened very quickly. I mean, nature doesn't like vacuums. So there was a big vacuum and something was going to fill that. And, it's what people really wanted. And so there was just a hole in the market for people who wanted to get together in this kind of Montessori-like method and learn about how to build stuff on the web at the intersection of art and technology, or food and technology in the case of Artsy, which was at General Assembly, or Food 52, which was at General Assembly, or music, SeatGeek was at General Assembly. I mean, these are all companies that are now very big or have sold for large numbers.
Was WeWork anywhere close in people's minds at the time or no?
WeWork was not only close in people's minds, it was close in physical proximity.
Really?
And yeah, there's an interesting parallel to Assembled Brands Capital because, when we were looking at WeWork, we were like, what are we doing wrong? These people are raising billions of dollars. They're growing 100 times faster than us. And then every time I would write down the math, like the economics, the value proposition, I kept coming to the conclusion that what they were doing made no sense. And so I was like, I just can't bring myself to do this. Which isn't to say that Adam Newman isn't a phenomenal salesperson. Obviously, I'm not taking that away. I'm talking about the actual business model itself.
Right.
So for Assembled Brands Capital, in terms of providing capital to entrepreneurs, I was watching what venture capitalists were doing and what banks were doing in terms of the funding that was provided and the way that these low rates were distorting markets. And it just made no sense. So we actually, relative to other, holding companies and groups funding businesses, grew relatively slowly. And that is what is like really providing us that opportunity now.
And I love that. And I'm gonna get right along. We'll jump back into that because I have plenty of questions on Assembled Brands. So bringing back here, you just started, you found this space in Flatiron, and you started listening to your customers. And your customers, you originally were just happy with providing this workspace, and customers were saying, yeah, but can you also help us with training and classes and all that, right? And then you immediately said, yeah, let's go for it. And like, what was the next step for you when it came to what you were offering, and where I guess there was a jump between listening to what people were asking from you and then what eventually happened with Enterprise?
I mean, it happened very organically and very quickly. I mean, I guess the key is always creating the conditions in which your customers will tell you exactly what they want. So like in the case of General Assembly, that was creating a physical space. In the case of Assembled Brands, it was in creating a store called The Line, and theline.com, in which we brought all of the best kind of luxury consumer products together under one roof and started talking to these entrepreneurs who were developing these products and saying, what do you need? What do you want? And they're like, well, we don't just need distribution. We need capital. We need a certain kind of capital to do product development.
Mm.
We need e-commerce support. We need to understand who our vendors are and how to shape our business models. And that's really how our model ended up forming around, providing rapid financing and, a network to helping people build these consumer product brands. And the first brand that emerged out of it was a brand called Kate, Khaite. And it's
Mm.
probably the foremost kind of luxury brand, American luxury brand now. And so the line really served as a slingshot for that company. And that was
That
again really
makes.
building the environment for that to happen.
And I know you were with General Assembly. There are four co-founders, which my initial reaction was, "Oh wow, that's impressive." That because usually when you have many co-founders, it kind of can muddy the waters in many different ways. There are many different ways in which things can go wrong. You were chief creative officer during that time. Any any what during that time frame, were there any particular challenges? What were your biggest challenges that you were facing? And maybe even taking a step back, how did you define what that role was? Because even then, that must have been still
Yeah, I
fairly
mean,
new.
every business I've started really has like a founding team. And there are always varying numbers of founders. I like to have at least one or two co-founders. Four is a
Mm.
lot. Wouldn't want more than four. But we really all had different skills. I mean, that's really what kind of building together is about, right? I mean, I think about it in the context of like a band, obviously we weren't the Beatles, but when you think about the Beatles, like the Beatles are, they're a team, a group who all have very different skills, and the collective is obviously much larger than any of the individuals. And so of course it's always challenging. Human relationships are difficult generally, but when people are able to see the kind of bigger vision come to life, that is such a amazing, kind of humbling and gratifying experience that it's just hard not to want more of it. So everything is challenging in building a business, but at the end of the day, what cures all of that is something working well.
Right.
Nobody really cares about things that don't work or that are of middling success. People really care about things that work well. And so, I
What were your
think,
biggest objectives then? So now you have customers, they're coming in. You decide you're providing the training as well. Uh, what at that moment were some of the biggest objectives for you as a creative officer? Did you say, hey guys, like I want to take care of this particular challenge and let me have a go at it? What was that?
yeah, I mean, my interest has always been in building franchises and in building brands. I
Mm.
can't really say why. I'm interested in products and design, and brands. Maybe it's something about the kind of intangible uh magic, so to
Mm.
speak, of like products and services that like people really love or make them feel a certain way. I don't just kind of, some people are born, they're like really excited about like
Yeah,
higher,
that's what
you
calls
know,
you. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, that is always what I was very interested in. And so, I was always interested in building things with people, and in particular in building brands, and always wondered, how do these enduring brands get built? Like, what are the ingredients to doing that? Like, how do you catch that like lightning in a bottle? And so I still don't have the answer to that, by the way.
did
Uh
did you know? when these classes were taking place, had you already, and let's say enterprises began reaching out to you and saying, hey, can you actually help us with training internally for our workforce? Was that a huge discovery for you? Did you immediately say like, aha, like that's the direction we take, and now what, like now these are the new challenges that we have ahead of us, or what did that look like?
Again, I mean, it happened very organically. And it was kind of building rapidly to meet the demand that
Mm.
we're seeing. So it was not a, hey, this is our like exact vision 10 years into the future of what we're going to build. Let's work backwards to doing that and delivering it. It was like, what do people want? And how do we build that for them? Which I know like maybe sounds boring, but really at the end of the day, that's what building businesses is about. It's about your customers telling you what to do. And oftentimes they tell you to do something, as I'm sure you know, that's very different than what you're doing. And you've got to obviously know what to do and what not to do. But generally, if your customers are all asking for the same thing, it's probably good to deliver them that thing. And in the case of General Assembly, it was, that kind of training in software development, user experience design, in assembled brands. It was really providing financing to do product development, but that was different than venture capital and more like credit in a bank. And so, really these things have always been about fixing about the mismatch between what we had, what was in the market, and what the customer wanted, like lining those things up as quickly as we possibly could. And as I
With
said before, like nature doesn't like vacuums, so something is going to fill that gap, and then it's about validating it.
with Assemble Brands, I know that you transitioned, General Assembly after a number of years, then you transitioned to Assemble Brands. Was Assemble Brands something that sprung out internally within like General Assembly, or that was something separate where you said, like this is the direction I want to take, and I'm going to step aside? Uh, what did that journey look like when you were,
Yeah,
and what was the background
I
for that
mean,
decision?
I was really excited about consumer products and consumer packaged goods. And honestly, the reason I ended up choosing luxury was because of the margins,
Mm,
because I had seen what LVMH had done and was doing. I thought
right.
that there was a big opportunity in luxury in the United States. And so I wanted to build a holding company, or an organization to serve those people developing consumer products and brands. And so that was I suppose the connection is that they're both platforms for lack of a better word, entrepreneurs who are developing companies, right? And some of those companies are software companies in the case of, General Assembly, and some of those companies are consumer product companies in the case of assembled brands. And that's really kind of what connects those things. And
When
by
you
the way,
step, yeah.
also dog fooding our own products, right? I mean,
Mm,
building brands, figuring out, well, what do we want? What would we need? I mean, when we were building Eight in the early days, I mean, by the way, this is the company that's doing more than 100 million in revenue. It's growing incredibly fast. It's opened its first store. We had needs ourselves that were not being met. So it was like, well,
mm,
what are those needs? And, in our case, it had a lot to do with financing product development in a non-dilutive way. So that's how
mm.
we ended up discovering that opportunity. Um,
And
and
with Kate, can you share can you share a bit of what that experience feels like from your customer side, like for Assemble Brands? So like Kate, for instance, you gave that as an example.
yes,
How did that develop? How did that evolve?
sure. So again, a case of having a number of phenomenal partners and co-founders. So my partner at The Line, which was the first company that launched, a retailer, my partner Vanessa was helping gather all of these product development leaders, for lack of a better word, right? The people who are designing the products and helping bring those products into the store and sell them like any store or distributor would. And then based on the sales that we were seeing of those new products, we were like, wow, this product developer, this person is really onto something because we can see it. And that person was Catherine Holstein, who wanted to start a brand. We ended up financing that brand, helping, really get that brand off the ground. The Line was what I always call like a slingshot for the company, because we had distribution, we had marketing, we had a studio to do all the photography and content marketing and whatnot. And that's how the brand got off the ground. And it started by creating denim and knits. And it grew and is growing so incredibly quickly. And my model has always been like, some things work, some things don't, right? They're not all going to work, but when they work, they really work. And I think Kate, this American luxury brand, is an example of that.
And when we talk about solving a customer's problem, and for assembled brands and the brands that you work with, what problem would you say is finance? You mentioned, right? Like financing is really important. What do their options look like if you are not there, right? Why is assembled brands so valuable to
It's a great
these
question.
brands?
I mean, one way I think about it is, what would happen if you took that service or product away? Would anybody care? Would your customer care? And in the case of Kate, the answer is like, yeah, the brand would care a lot. They wouldn't have the money to grow, right? The alternative would be going to a venture capitalist. But the problem is that brands that develop products have inventory and product development and R&D costs. They're not software businesses. Even if they've got luxury margins, which are like 70%, 80%, they still have a cash flow cycle that requires developing and manufacturing products. So if you're going to a venture capitalist and you need cash every product cycle, you're not going to end up with very much ownership in your company. So that model doesn't work. Then you've got banks, and banks are like, well, like, what are your assets? Like, what's your profitability? Like, they're not looking at your e-commerce metrics. They're not looking at LTV to CAC. All they care about is how long have you been in business and how profitable are you? So VCs really weren't a good fit, and banks weren't really a good fit. Banks started doing a bunch of this venture-like lending, frankly, because they had no other choice, because rates were so low and they had to find yield somewhere. But neither were a good option, and there was a vacuum there, and that's really the vacuum we filled. And as you know, banks are no longer doing this. Ironically, it was not those loans that blew the banks up, but that's a different kind of technical banking conversation about holding these like very long dated treasuries that like lost a ton of value very quickly. So they had this asset liability mismatch. VCs obviously discovered that these consumer products are not very venture backable businesses. So they withdrew, understanding that these aren't software businesses. And so that pipeline that we had built, that origination capability, the portfolio management capability, the technology IP, the ability to underwrite, right, the ability to monitor, has become incredibly valuable, because we are one of the only providers of capital to this market now. So we think the opportunity is pretty big.
Have there been, I was just going to ask, other players similar to you, right? To assembled brands,
Mhm.
what would you say, what do you believe are the biggest barriers for other players to come into your space? And then what do you believe you're doing right that help you avoid these barriers or that others might be doing wrong?
So it's a great question. I would say the barrier has gotten higher because the cost of capital has gotten so much higher. So the cost of actually starting a business like this has gone up significantly. So I would say that's kind of one piece of it, is just the cost of doing it. The second, of course, is actually building the intellectual property, the brand name, the technology, the capabilities, and the team to go scale, right? It may seem simple, right? Oh, well, you're just like writing checks and giving people money. It turns out that it's not that simple, right? You've got to get a lot of opportunities in the door. You need to understand how to underwrite them. You need to understand what you do and what you don't do. In other words, what we call our credit box. You've then got to decide how big of financing to do. How much capital do you provide? At what terms do you provide them? Why do you provide those terms? How much risk are you taking? How much reward are you getting? How much equity value is the brand taking the money going to build for themselves? Once you have 40 or 50 of these companies in your group, which we do, how do you monitor all of those things? So there's a lot that goes into doing it well. And when you look at our competition, none of whom I will name, a lot of them thought it was as easy as writing just like non-recourse checks that had a high interest rate to anyone who clicked on their website. And they deployed billions of dollars to doing that. And then that money just like evaporated. They had no recourse. They had no inventory. They had no assets. It made no sense. So kind of, much like WeWork, these things work until they don't. And it's when those models stop working that you really see kind of who's got the goods and who doesn't. And it's never been my own game or aspiration to want to like try to do something and then get out really quickly before everything falls apart, if that makes sense. Like I want to build things that are like
sustainable.
Yeah, that last, like, that's, of course, you want to make money and you want to prosper and you want to do well, but like that's not an end in itself. And frankly, I get a lot more joy out of helping other people do that and helping them build value and live the American dream and have the luck that I've had and that my parents and my aunts and uncles, and that's a cool thing to be able to help other people do, and is very motivating to me.
When you founded Assembled Brands, or co-founded it, so how many other founders were there for Assembled?
Assembled Brands has grown really to become a financing company in particular. And so my two partners, one is a woman named Vanessa Trena, and she was really the one sourcing a lot of these brands. And the other is Michael Lipkin, and he's really been the one doing the, credit underwriting. But I would say there were early founding team members like John Zanowski, who was the CFO of General Assembly and then the CFO of Assembled Brands, who's still on our board. There's a close collaborator I've worked with for a long time named Mimi Chun, who was at IDEO for a long time and helped build the brand at General Assembly and helped in the early days at the line and is now involved in a nonprofit that I started called Future Now. And so, I feel like I've got this kind of community of people that builds together and that has relationships with one another. And it's really like a web of trust. So I don't I don't really think about it maybe in the same sense of like, this is my co-founder and that's my co-founder. I think like, these are my partners. And I believe that companies have many foundings, right? I don't think that yes, there are the people who are in the room on day one, and those people should get rewarded and should be recognized. And I think when things work, they grow so incredibly fast that it often requires bringing in new people at a new founding moment of a business, and recognizing that I think is also a really important thing.
What has been something, if you were to see yourself a couple years back, go back in time, and you're giving yourself some advice, is for Assemble Brands, what would that be? What are things that you say, oh, I wish, having had to start this and get the partners together, and then having those first couple brands, what are things that you think come to mind when it comes to, oh, this could have been helpful to know, or don't waste time doing this, or don't
so
waste
many things. I mean, just to touch on the like co-founder thing again, I mean, as I said before, the things that work, the companies grow a lot more quickly than most humans are capable of growing. And so it's not unusual that a company outgrows its early hires. And that doesn't make them bad hires. It means you need to bring in the right people, sometimes above them. And that can be really hard. But, I think that's something to celebrate. That's also why I don't like giving C-suite jobs out of the gate. You make somebody the head of something. And the good news, of course, is that the company is growing faster than most humans are capable of doing, including me. But, or you, or whoever that person is, but we'll be able to watch how it's done. We're bringing in somebody who's more experienced, and that's the opportunity. And so kind of having the understanding or the awareness or the maturity to see that and to cultivate an environment where everyone can see that. That's a hard thing to do, but a critical thing to do if you want long-term success in building something of scale.
Have you seen your role as you go through these phases that you've mentioned? Have you seen your role change? Have your priorities changed? Have there been new functions or new responsibilities where you're saying, this is important. I need to allocate more of my time to this now versus,
Yes.
2 years
Yeah,
ago.
I mean, so and this, Alejandro. I mean, so much of this is about knowing oneself and what one is good at. And we're all, good at certain things and bad at other things. I mean, I really do think people are kind of born with natural talents, and it's about finding those things, and then about finding other people who've got different natural talents that complement yours. I mean, maybe this is blindingly obvious, but it's pretty amazing when you create a group of people who have complementary natural talents, who know what the edges of those talents are, and are able to work together to build something. And whenever Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger always say this, but like, maybe the most important trait one can have is knowing the edges of one's knowledge and talent. It's when you don't know those edges that you can really get killed, right? And so that has, I think, been, and that's also hard because you have to learn what those edges are, right? The only way to learn what those, I mean, it's better to not cross those lines or to not fall over those edges, but we all do, and it's how we learn. So would I tell myself, my younger self, exactly what my edges were? Of course, but like, that's a counterfactual. It doesn't really make sense. I wouldn't have learned what those things were had I not tried and failed and tried again. And I know that sounds trite, but I think it's true.
I think that makes complete sense. Did COVID alter I know there's I'm sure there's a yes to this, but because COVID changed many things, but did COVID alter the way things were being done in your space, even when it came with financing, or no?
Well, I'm not sure if it, yeah, I mean, maybe it was COVID. It's hard to know. I mean, what really transformed financing, and by the way, this is true of venture capital, it's true of
Mhm.
private equity, it's true of credit, it's true of everything, was having 0% interest rates for a long period of time. I mean, that really distorted the entire world and everybody's sense of risk. I mean, people were buying monkey JPEGs for $5 million. Do you know what I mean? Like that happened.
Oh, it's so
And
true.
you know, that obviously is one of the craziest examples. And by the way, I'm not saying NFTs generally are
Yeah,
or that blockchain's not interesting. I'm just saying that artifact to me will be looked back upon like, wow, things were really insane. People had no sense of what was valuable and what was not valuable. And so in that regard, everything has changed, right? When you take rates from 0% to 5% to 6% to 7%, you know, that's like the laws of physics in economics. It's like gravity. So yeah, when you create that kind of gravitational force downward with rates going up, it changes everything.
are there any technologies that are exciting for you right now that are popping up, and whether it's for the businesses that you're a part of or anything that you see that gets you really excited about the direction of a certain sector?
Well, I think they're probably all the same things you're very excited about that are on the front page of every newspaper almost every day. So I won't opine on those. Maybe a different angle might be, I think the intersection of a lot of emergent technologies is very interesting. So, I think about synthetic biology and artificial intelligence,
Mm,
right? You think about um, blockchain and just financial services generally. I think about genetic engineering and psychiatry. I mean, these are going to be just world changing technologies and inventions. And, I was in a seminar the other day. I'm a trustee at Columbia University, and they were talking about exactly this. Like, there hasn't been that much genetic engineering in the psychiatric space, right? If you
mm.
think about that, that's pretty crazy that, we are now starting to apply genetic engineering to our brains to cure diseases like extreme schizophrenia, cure them. And so when you think about that
Incredible.
10 years out, 20 years out, 30 years out, it's just hard to imagine the kind of breakthroughs we'll see at the intersection of these emergent technologies. So that's all very exciting to me. It's certainly above my pay grade. I'll stick to financing consumer brands and building companies, but I'm
Knowing your edges.
definitely
uh,
fascinated by everything happening in the world today.
that's really
Uh,
cool. Well, Adam, I appreciate the time again and sharing your journey and knowledge.